So welcome to this evening's session. It's an author in conversation with Zac O'Yeah and Samar Harlankar, discussing the book Digesting India. Before I introduce the speakers, just wanted to request everyone to turn their phones on silent. And we'll finish the session with a Q&A at the end. So just wait for the mic to be passed to you and you can ask your question. Zac O'Yeah has published 17 books in Swedish and English, including fiction and non-fiction bestsellers. His travel writings have appeared in several magazines like the National Geographic Traveler and Vagabond, and his work has been translated into over 20 languages. Samar Harlankar has been a journalist for 30 years. He is the editor of Article 14, a website that is focused on the operation of the rule of law in India, and was previously the editor of India Spend and Fact Checker. Over to you, Samar.
Good evening, welcome. And the first thing I'll have to correct you, because I also struggled with this. He hasn't written 17 books. I think either he's not telling the truth or he's being sparse with it. His website says he's written 19 and he's on his 20th, but it may be his 23rd. We are not sure and he isn't telling us. Be that as it may, yeah.
I'm also not sure. So
Huh?
I'm also not sure. So it's.
Yeah,
I try to count them every day, and I kind of end up at different numbers. You know, anything between 18 and 27, depending on my mood.
Yeah, and plus for those of you who don't know, he writes not just in English, but Swedish and Finnish, which for many of you who might think that they're very close to each other, the languages are not related at all, Swedish and Finnish. So I'm just astounded at how he is so prolific.
Yeah, I believe I've read in some linguistic study that Finnish is much closer to Dravidian languages than to Swedish, in fact.
That is correct, yes, that's what I have heard as well. Okay, so the bad news first. This is his swan song, so to say. He's saying he's done with travel and food writing, for magazines at least. I just discovered this. We were just having butter garlic prawns, and he was having largely, and some super strong beer of some sort. And whether that was what he said at the bottom of that bottle, I don't know. But Zac, is this supposed to be your swan song? Are you going to stop travel and food writing? Because as we were discussing earlier, it's really hard work.
Well, yes. In our pre-talk show, pre-talk, we talked about these things for a bit because Samar is also writing about food and from different places. So we're kind of comparing our experiences. And in my case, I think, what was the question again?
I forgot. No, you said yes,
oh, yeah,
song.
that's what.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
You were talking quite gloomily about saying that this is going to be the
so
end.
it's actually, I mean, in the title, there's these brackets. Within bracket, it says a memoir. And the one thing is that what happened was that when I started writing this book, it was when the pandemic started and suddenly there were lockdowns. And until that downlocking happened, I had been doing travel writing for 30 years, more or less continuously, with breaks for writing novels and doing other kinds of writing. But generally, like travel writing had been like a constant for 3 decades, and largely in India. And then suddenly you're in a lockdown and you can't travel and you can't look forward to what you'll do next, where you will travel next. So at that point, you sort of ask yourself, what do I do? Then the solution is to kind of look back at like what you've done and what kind of travels one has been doing and sort of analyze it. Because it's like when one is in a constant forward motion and just going from one place to the next to write about it and be prolific. It sort of you don't really have time to reflect on it, and at that point, I think my solution was to kind of start looking back and thinking like what I've been doing over the last few decades, and finding if there's any particular particular red thread in it, which is like some kind of story worth telling. And I've been writing about a lot of things when I travel, like culture, arts, monuments, historical things, and all. But then I noticed that like one red thread that was running through all my writing was that uh, I've been always looking for good food and like good restaurants, nice restaurants, and I've always had this idea that the best thing in life is to find a nice bar, sit down with a good book like this one, for example, and order something nice to eat and read, for a few leisurely hours, whether it's in your native Goa or wherever it is in the world. So, so then I thought, like, let me write a book that will fit perfectly for that kind of situation. Like somebody who loves travel, who enjoys eating, who likes to have a beer once in a while. I don't drink excessively, by the way, but like
He was drinking
occasional
excessively
beer.
now, at least.
Yeah. So I thought like a book about that kind of thing, and because I don't, in the bookshops, I usually go and look for books that interest me. And that kind of book I hadn't seen in the bookshops. And I thought maybe I should just write that kind of book, like about traveling around in India and, enjoying life in that way, with like exploring different cuisines and foods. And for me also, traveling around India and eating in India has been a way of getting to know the country and understanding the country, which I kind of realized when I started going through my past travels, that one way of exploring and understanding India is really through its various, very diverse food cultures, which sort of kind of breaks that idea of, because I'm originally from Sweden or Finland or both, and there we have a very clear idea about what Indian food is. It's tandoori chicken and maybe palak paneer. So like in Sweden, that's what what we eat. Like there's Indian restaurants on every street corner, and the big top selling foods are tandoori chicken and palak paneer and butter garlic naan. And Indian food is so much more than that, I realized as I was traveling around India. So I think that was the starting point of the book. Then when I was looking back at all these like 30 years of traveling and eating on the road, that in a way, a good way to kind of figure out Indian culture is through looking at the diversity of food across the country.
But it's not only about food, is it? Because there's a lot about literature, people, and locating famous people from the past in New India, as it were. I mean, there really has been a lot of research. Apart from eating his way through, and he does a lot about that. It's really funny, of course. But there's a lot of really serious, really interesting stuff about. There are a lot of things I did not know. For example, one about the food, which is quite something because I thought I knew a reasonable amount about the food of South India. But the second bit is about people like Herman Hesse, Graham Greene, Somerset Maugham, Bruce Chatwin. All of these people have had very interesting and engaging times in India. And he's woven that in very beautifully in the book with the food, the travel, and the canvas is vast from all these people to the Cholas, the Gangas, Mahatma Gandhi, etc. So let's talk a bit about all these people. How did you pick all these people?
I think largely it's mostly about writers I like to read or that I've been reading and idolizing at some point. And suppose like when one is growing up in Europe, one inevitably reads Hermann Hesse and his Steppenwolf novel, which was like very influential in the 60s, 70s. Although he got a Nobel Prize for it, I think, in 1950 or earlier. So for example, that kind of writer, you think, oh, he's a very European writer. He's German and all, and But then, as you travel to North Kerala, you find out that his grandfather actually lived in Talasari, and was one of the first people to do like a Malayalam dictionary to put together. And his grandfather, whose name was also Herman, um, uh, learned to write Malayalam. And so he was one of the first Malayalam writers. And he was involved in, setting up printing presses and that kind of things. And essentially, he was a missionary who had been sent out from Europe to convert people in India. And he was meant to be posted in Calcutta, but he came to Kerala and he felt like, oh, these are the best people in the world. So he decided, I'll stay here. And he set up a life in Talasari and became like a very important educator. Instead of doing like missionary activity, he was having discussions with all kinds of people on how to build up a literary culture there. And his bungalow can actually be visited even today.
One of the main streets is named after him, Gundet Road.
Yeah. So his surname wasn't Hesse, but Gundert. And then he eventually he went back to Germany, and his book collection of Malayalam manuscripts and all are in like a university library in Germany. And Hermann Hesse, when he grew up, so his grandfather was very important to him as an influence. And he had this sort of dream of actually going to Kerala to go to where he thought his roots were. But actually, I mean, his roots were not really there because his grandfather had married some French lady from Mahe, which was the adjoining French colony. And so, but Hermann Hesse still had that idea that he would want to go back to Kerala. And he actually took a ship all the way to Sri Lanka, to Colombo, from where he was going to go to Kerala. And then on the way, he was, suddenly he realized that, oh, Indian food, I could not eat it, he said in German to himself. And then there was all other things like he felt, he spoke to many of the Hindu and Muslim passengers who were complaining about colonialism. So you also get a little bit like, do I really want to go to a colonial country? So combined with massive diarrhea and an anti-colonial feeling, in Colombo he took the next ship back to Germany. So he actually never set foot in Kerala, which was the objective of the journey. But then he wrote that novel Siddhartha, which was sort of loosely based on Buddha's life, and which was made into a film, I think, with Shakti Kapoor.
Famous movie.
Shashi Kapoor.
And a famous nude scene with Simi Garewal, if I remember right. Yeah. I was in school, and we were desperate to see this Simi Garewal and Siddhartha, but we were not allowed to, unfortunately.
That scene wasn't important.
You could only see a back in the poster.
To you, clearly, yeah.
It was at that point, yeah. So how did you choose all these people? Did you just stumble on them as you were carrying on? Bruce Chatwin, Graham Greene, Somerset Maugham, or did you go there and then do the research and then?
Well, these are all writers who have influenced me as a travel writer, and because they've all been traveling and writing, and I kind of, in a way, discovered that that one thing they all have in common is that they all came to India to try to understand the country. So, like when I first came here, I was pretty clueless, and I felt a little bit like as an outsider, which I don't really feel any longer, because many of my friends are in the audience. Hello. And but also this thing of realizing that for many Western writers, it has been an important thing to come to India, to try to understand India, like Somerset Maugham. He also traveled in those parts of Kerala, and but he, I think, decided that, because Rudyard Kipling had already written so much about India, he didn't dare to write about it. And then Second World War started, and he had to go home. And then he was thinking, like, I'll come back and write about it. But then, it never happened. And E.M. Forster, of course, he's written some pretty great novels about India as well. So I was looking at these people who are like, I mean, I can't really compare myself with them. I mean, they're great writers. I'm just like a normal writer. But there was still that thing that, okay, so there's a tradition that one can kind of be part of. And so in the book, I try to kind of create like a picture of that tradition of a certain number of these Western writers, and like, and it's not like a literary analysis of all their work and anything like that, but it's more like about like where they went and some of the things they experienced and thought when they went to the places. Same places where I go, many years later. In some cases, I stay in the same room where they stayed, and as I'm writing this book, and just to get like an idea of that particular tradition, which is so. Although it's like mainly a book about having nice food, there is that sort of cultural side aspect of all these intellectuals who actually also came to all these places and also probably enjoyed nice food, most of them. So one could say, like, trying to kind of show that there is this sort of culture of Western writers interested in understanding India and kind of writing books that bring India closer to a Western audience, which was like, especially before internet and when you could Google about foreign places, it was like very important to have these sort of transmissions that were like making India alive to the foreign readers. So a little bit I felt like, I mean, this is something I should look into because I've been doing the same thing, and to see, because I believe like one should not live in a historyless situation, but one should look at like what people have done before oneself. And one should never kind of claim that, oh, I'm the first person ever to discover this thing.
Yeah, that is very honest. So from history, then it comes down to, and which is a good time to refer to Bangalore. Especially since he's become a true blue Bangalorean. And in fact, I've spent, more than half a lifetime here, but there are lots of places that he's been to that I have never been to. I spent years taking the bus number 131 to Majestic, but I don't know Majestic remote, as I don't know Majestic at all. If you read what Zac has written about Majestic, and all that comes through here as well. All kinds of places I have never been to in Majestic. And then, of course, from Somerset Maugham to Graham Greene, then he has conversations like this, quirky conversations overhead at Blossoms. Guy 1, why are you going there? That's romance section. Guy 2, yeah, I know, dude, I want to see if they have one book. Guy 1, full romance books you're reading, huh? Are you Romeo or Devdas? No, dude, I saw one chick on my bus reading some Nora Roberts book. I thought I can say, I also read, if I get the chance to talk to her. Dude, you're my guru from Nauda. So, there's everything in this book, really. So you should really read this whole book. And I've enjoyed the last 5-6 days reading this. But returning to Bangalore. So first of all, I realized we have a lot of things in common. As you can see, we realized that we are wearing the same shirt. Reasonably the
Twinning.
same. So yeah, we didn't.
We're very Instagrammable right now.
Yeah, I know. So I'm learning Instagram, so I quickly put him on Instagram just before coming here. So the other thing, of course, I realized that he has the largest section of the book is on Bangalore. So appropriately so, since it's launching here, so all of you should take a look at it. And this is a wonderful look at Bangalore. And he goes specifically to the parts of Bangalore that I grew up in. I spent the first 5 or 6 years of my life on Broadway Road near Shivaji Nagar. And I did not know all those years that there was Hotel New Hilal down there, which has the best spare parts. And the best spare parts restaurants are all on Broadway Road. And he's also been to KGF, Kolar Goldfields, where I was born. So I said, this is a fantastic thing.
It's like almost your autobiography in a way.
Exactly. Written by someone else. So it's a biography in that sense. Yes, yes. So what is your, let's talk a bit about your relationship with Bangalore. you were talking about how you felt out of place when you came initially, etc., to India as such. So how did you ease into Bangalore, and how did you land up in Majestic, which is where you seem to have spent a lot of your time?
Well, actually, see, when I came to Bangalore, it was like that kind of a moment where you're usually when you come from Europe to India, you land up in Delhi. Then you do like the North India, like Varanasi, Rajasthan, Taj Mahal, all these things. You get cheated of all your money. You get cheated into buying lots of fake jewelry. You get like all these things. And you have nice experiences also, but like there's a lot of air cleaners in Delhi that want to clean your wallet and
Green globs on your
the green globes on the feet and all those things that they do there in Connaught Place especially. So I went through all that, and then finally I came to Bangalore and got off the train in Majestic. At what is now the Kempegowda railway station or some Sankrang. Yeah. So my Kannada is still not super good. Anyway, so getting off there, it was a bit of a relief because there were not that many touts and people who wanted you to do anything, because there's actually nothing you can do in Bangalore as a tourist. Except just enjoy. I mean, good restaurants, nice bookshops, and there's like some small monument, but there's no Taj Mahals that you must see. So like it was a very nice moment, and I was thinking like when I got off the train in Bangalore, this is like more than 30 years ago now, I just thought like, okay, I'll just figure out where I'm going next. And then I realized that there's no need to go anywhere next because life is perfect here. I mean, like when you're in heaven, why leave? So I just ended up staying in Majestic for a month or maybe 2 months and roaming around town. And in those days, I think most of you are younger than 30, except Samar.
Me, yeah.
But in those days, like there was hardly any cars in the streets, and it was very low-key. Even like the only time these gundas tried to rob me in Majestic, it was a very low-key robbery. Like I had gone to, in those days there were no ATMs, so you had to go to a Thomas Cook office in MG Road to exchange traveler's checks. I exchanged some traveler's checks and I got like this stapled bunch of 100 rupee notes, like 10,000 rupees would be stapled into one bundle. So I had that in my pocket and I was walking back to my lodgings in Majestic. Like lodgings in those days, it was like, I think 85 rupees per night. And you got like hot water for 2 hours in the morning and some breakfast buffet where the cockroaches on the floor. And so 10,000 was quite a lot of money if you spend 85 rupees on lodgings. So I was walking back to my lodgings in Majestic with that money. And then I was surrounded by these 6, 7, 8 guys who looked very friendly, like they were smiling. But they all looked like huge Old Monk bottles on legs. And they had that body type, like in Kannada films, you have this idea of body type. And then I realized that, oh, these guys are probably going to rob me. Because I'd gone to other countries where people always rob you, and North India also. And so these fellows, they were looking friendly, smiling and all, and then asking me some questions like that. And then suddenly the leader said, "Give us 20 rupees." And I thought that was, even I laughed. I thought that was very hilarious. And so these guys got very confused at that moment. Like, what is this white lunatic? We are trying to rob him and he's laughing. And then I just, while they were confused and looking at each other, I just walked off. And they were just stood there like, "Hello, come back, we are trying to rob you." And I had been prepared to give them 10,000 bucks. Anyway, so like in those days, it was like that. I mean, there were like bad experiences were even like sort of jolly in that way. And and so I kind of felt very relaxed because, like, if you go to New York or some place like that, it's not like they don't say that I want to rob you. They just sort of put a knife in your face or a gun in your face and hand it over. I mean, like, you don't have that option of.
Even the rowdies are killing each other, not anyone else.
Exactly. So I sort of enjoyed it in that way, like you find a place that is really pleasant, and then I kind of ended up staying here. And I mean, I sort of thought that Bangalore was very nice. Then I went somewhere else, and then somehow I ended up in Bangalore again. And then next year I thought, I should focus on other countries. And then before I know it, I'm invited for some Sahitya Academy literary festival in Bangalore, and then I'm back again. And then I'm back again, and then I'm back again. And then I sort of basically got married to the city, and it was like, it felt like meaningless to leave Bangalore. You know, like you come to that point in your life when you realize that this is
You're
my
a prisoner
destiny.
of Bangalore, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was reading this book, I also write a little dubious food column. So I was, it's difficult. I've been writing it now for the last 15 years or so. It's very difficult to sustain sometimes. And I had not cooked. So I said, what do I cook? And I was reading this book, and which is why I want to come to my favorite part of the book. And I was reading it, and he was talking about his adventures in Tirupur. Thalassery in Kongu Nadu and Tirupur especially. So Tirupur, you know, as he says, Pankaj Mishra in Butter Chicken in Ludhiana had dismissed it in a line, basically saying that what firecrackers are to Sivakasi, underwear is to Tirupur. And that was the end of it. But reading Zac's account, he landed up in a restaurant chain, which I did not know of actually, where he had some exceptionally good dish, which I tried to recreate. The name of the restaurant was Junior Kupanna. I don't know how many of you know of Junior Kupanna. I know some of you know, yes.
They have branches across Tamil Nadu.
Branches.
There is a senior Kupanna, I think.
Yeah, the mother branch in Erode. In Erode is a mother branch called Senior Kupanna. Anyway, in any event, so the dish that he obviously ate a lot of was mutton pallipalyam from a place called Pallipalyam. And the interesting thing is it takes, apart from turmeric, which is grown in that region specifically, you correct me if I'm wrong on any of these things.
No, it's a
there is no
turmeric
other
capital of the world.
Turmeric capital of the world, yeah.
I'm not Tirupur, Erode, I think.
Yes, Pallipalyam, yes. So anyway, this particular mutton pallipalyam has no, unlike most Indian cooking, has no powdered spice. This all fresh red chilies, green chilies, fresh garlic and fresh ginger, and fresh coconut. So I tried it. I said, how can this actually be? And that was from Tamil Nadu. I tried it and it was turned out, and of course, I was a little health conscious, so I put chicken into it instead of mutton. But it turned out to be spectacularly good. So, you know, you should try it. And I found that there were versions of it floating around on the internet, chicken pallipalyam, and which apparently is a thing as well. So tell us about the Kongu Nadu itself, because you mentioned to me once saying that the difference between Thai food and Vietnamese food is like the difference between Chettinad food and Kongu Nadu.
Yeah, in the sense that like we all know about Chettinad food and we all know about Thai food, and it's like all popular, spicy, nice and all that kind of thing. But then, like, if you go to Thailand and you travel to Vietnam, where I spent the winter there. So after Thailand, I felt very, bloated and all this sort of, all this Michelin type of crap that they serve in Bangkok. Then I came to Vietnam and the food was so, subtle and beautiful. It's like you go from hell to heaven, and instead of having Satan cook for you, you have angels cook for you. So, like in a way, I can also compare that to the Chettinad, Kongu Nadu, difference because I mean they're very related. Like Southeast Asian cuisines are related, and the Tamil cuisines are in a way related. But like the Chettinad food also believes in that, like lots of masala and lots of spice and lots of flavor. And I love that, like once in a while. But I think like if I ate it 3 times a day, I would probably, turn either into a chettiar or die. But like in the Kongunad food, it has many similarities. There was that amazing thing of like a sort of rustic freshness and lot of like that subtle way that you have in Vietnamese food where you don't overdo anything, but you just do it like just right. So you get like the just right flavors. So I was looking for Kongu Nadu food in Tirupur. And I've gone to Kongu Nadu times before also, because it's a very interesting, historically very interesting region, which is like rather little known today, but from ancient times it's been like a very influential region. And the food there today also carries on that tradition from those times. Like the ingredients are largely the same that you'll read about if you read like the old Sangam texts, what they have like millets and all things. So like much of it is there is a lot of tradition in the food, and it's also very healthy food in general, and it's also very tasty food, which which is very hard to find in restaurants. So I was walking around in Tirupur for several days, asking for Congo food, and they said, "Oh, there's an A2B over there. Oh, you can get Chennai food there. Oh, you want paratas?" And I said, "No, I want Congo food." And people said, "Oh, there's no Congo food." So then I ended up going back to Junior Kupanas, which is the only restaurant chain that actually specializes on these foods. And I had like 3 meals there every day, and not a single time did I try the same food, but like, and everything was extremely satisfying in that way.
You also write that there's very little water there, and in fact, in that dish I made also, there was very little oil, and they said don't add. You say it, so I followed that. Don't add water. So I just closed it, and it steamed within itself, and that is a function of the fact that
meat itself that cooks it. Yeah, so it's a very arid region. So many of the foods also, like the fact that they grow a lot of millets and things, has to do with the fact that they have water scarcity. And also they've had, like since ancient times, since like the Sangam times, they've had a very good system of water channels, which are still like the same water channels that were dug by the royals in those days, Pandyas and all these dynasties, are still in use today, actually, in the farming areas. So it's a very interesting place to go to, because you think, oh, India is so very modern, like Bangalore, we have metro and all these kind of things. And then you go to a place like that where you can actually connect with culture, a lifestyle that has sort of persisted for 2,000 years. And it's sort of visible in certain things like certain foods, which doesn't have a lot of outside ingredients, like imported ingredients, and other traditions. So it's a wonderful way of experiencing that sort of rare thing of actually. I mean, it's not like people live in the past. Tirupur is a huge garment manufacturing center. They manufacture for all the international brands like all over the world. And I mean, in fact, it's the biggest garment manufacturing center in all of India, I believe, when it comes to export. But like in that food-wise, for example, you still find those links to the past.
Let's change tack a bit and go to, there's a chapter here called the Mahatma's Maharashtra. So he's done Maharashtra, but through the eyes of and the journeys of Mahatma Gandhi. So he went to Sevagram, obviously quite some time back, and there was a sign, I think, on the ashram that you stayed in, which said, "Silence is obligatory at meals. It is uncivil and a form of violence to criticize while eating any badly cooked item of the food. Such criticism should be conveyed to the manager in writing after the meal." Why did you choose the Mahatma's route through Maharashtra?
Well, I've always been interested in Gandhi and his ideas, and it was a way of getting to know him better. Because, like, one thing is that we think mainly of Mahatma Gandhi as a political leader and all this, like what he did, in the freedom struggle and independence of India, and how his ideas influenced other colonized countries to become independent in those times. But I've been interested in him as a person on that level, as the way he inspired the anti-colonial movements across the world. But then I was curious to go to the ashram, and actually when I went to the Sevagram ashram, which is it's kind of near Nagpur, and Mahatma Gandhi selected that particular place because it's sort of basically in the center of India. Because if you look at India and map, it's a bit like that, and it's right there in the middle. So it would be like from there closest to anywhere, as close to anywhere in the country as you can get in those days. And so that was probably one of the reasons why he selected that place. And then I was sort of moving around in that area. Then I thought, let me have a look at this place, because currently it's quite remote. There is a railway station, but it's not like on the tourist track, and it's not like a hot tourist destination, like where people go to get suntans and dip in pools. So I got off the railway station, and there was like nobody there, like a single auto rickshaw standing, the guy half asleep. And he only spoke Marathi, and I, of course, don't speak very good Marathi. But I had like a banknote in my pocket. I pointed at the picture of Mahatma Gandhi. Do you know this fellow? And 100 rupee note. He he knew. So he said in Marathi, "I'll take you there, whatever how anybody in Marathi knows how."
Chala Zac O'Yeah.
Okay. So he said like that. So I hopped on with my luggage, and I came to the ashram, and I sort of vaguely knew that there's a museum there. So I thought I'll have a look at this museum, and then I'll catch a bus to Nagpur and have some non-veg and beer. But then when I stepped into the ashram to have a look around and with my backpack and all, so some fellow just came and said, "Come with me." So he took me to Gandhi's guest rooms. So he had like some 3 guest rooms there where, Nehru and Sardar Patel and these people used to stay, and some third fellow. So he said that stay in this guest room. And I was like, oh, okay, I thought, so I'm not going to Nagpur to have non-veg today. And then I kind of stayed in that guest room. It was really nice. It was built in the 1930s with like, when I switched on the lights, the electrical wire was a little loose. So I kind of got like massive electrical shock and flew across the room. And, so I thought like, oh, they gave me a room. So let me stay here. And then they told me like, you come for the dinner and at a certain hour, it's very early dinner there.
5:30, you say?
Yeah. And then because you have to wake up for the prayers at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, 4 o'clock, 4 a.m.
And then you have to do chores and all that kind of thing. So it was like kind of unplanned, but I thought like, okay, I'm here now, let me go with the flow. So then I ended up there like having some meals with them, and they didn't know. I mean, we couldn't speak with each other, but like after breakfast the next morning, they pointed out some patch of weeds behind the toilets and said that you clear that weed. So I was doing that, like clearing the weed, and then after breakfast, you were supposed to do spinning for 2 hours. So,
But you said the food, coming down to the food, was not very impressive. You said they simply served chapatis, a boiled vegetable hodgepodge featuring homegrown beetroots and a modest salad of raw plain veggies, and the only spice that you could make out was salt, isn't it?
yeah, it was very simple, like very basic food, but it was kind of nice after, like rich food that I usually eat on my travels, to eat this light food. And it was very fresh and very homemade and very, initially it was a shock, of course, for a non-vegetarian to face this thing. But then, like, once you start eating it, you realize that, oh, this is actually nice. And then after that visit, I started looking into Gandhi's writings on food. And he was actually, his biggest best-selling book in his lifetime was his Key to Health, not My Experiments with Truth. And so his food columns that he constantly wrote with health advice and all kind of things were like widely read by people. And I realized that he was sort of up to date with the latest ideas in all over the world about vitamins and nutrition, and he had an amazing appetite to be an ascetic when it comes to experimenting with diets and foods. So he was like a fruitarian for some time. Then he was doing like a raw food diet, and that's how he broke his teeth, because he was eating raw rice without boiling it, and he was chewing it, and then the teeth fell out.
Oh, maybe that's why the mush that you were eating there. And you quote someone in Sevagram as saying, as a visitor's comment, saying, steaming hell brew served up in a great bucket. And there's Guha's biography, you quote Ramchandra Guha's biography.
Yeah, that was an English missionary who visited and who felt that it was a steaming hell brew. I mean, missionaries, they like to use that word hell in context of everything like food and all. But I didn't feel the food was, because it set me thinking, because in many countries across the world, now recently it's been this thing like, oh, you should only eat salad, you should focus on natural foods. Food should be grown in your own backyard. It should not be imported from far away. And Mahatma Gandhi already 100 years ago, he was into these things and thinking about the things that people, at least in the West, people started catching on to mostly in the 1970s, after the hippies started going green and all that. Then it became popular in the West, and in countries like Sweden. I remember I used to be in a pop group in the 1980s, and when we were on tour, we had like one vegetarian member in the band. So the rest of us, like whenever we stopped in a restaurant, we got like nice steaks. And the vegetarian said, I would like vegetarian. So he got French fries and the gravy without a steak. The poor guy. But now in the West, but that was in the 1980s. Now in the West, you can actually get good vegetarian food today. But and like all these diet consciousness, now like, of course, now Europe is full of vegans and all these strange people who don't eat real food. But like, it's a recent trend. Whereas Mahatma Gandhi was already experimenting with like milk-free diets and all these kind of things.
You've got an account here which says Gandhi asked, you do not like vegetables? Of some foreigner.
Some foreigner.
After being fed the same mush of pumpkins cooked in spinach day after day. So he said, it's
that
just
was
that
not me, that foreigner.
I was wondering if it was you. It's just that I don't like the taste of the same vegetables 3 days in a row. Gandhi pondered this and suggested, try adding salt and lime. So, after eating your way through, your life through this book, etc., don't you have, and I had to ask this, don't you have any health problems? How have you coped?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, actually. One of the reasons why I'm stopping travel writing is because it sort of takes a toll on the health. Because when you go like professional travel writing, sometimes you have to eat through 5 restaurants a day because you have only a limited number of days in a city, and you have to try so many restaurants. So usually after a trip, when one comes home, one is pretty much destroyed and has to try kind of do some fasting before one is sent out on the road again and try to recover. And it didn't matter so much like when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, and if I did once some magazine wanted to send me on a 1-month tour of the United States and to see if I can survive on junk food for a month. So I came back home some, 25 kgs heavier. And my verdict was that you can survive, but it's very difficult on American junk food for a month. And it took me but when you're young, you can lose 25 kgs quite easily. But like at my age now, if I go on a food tour, it's a big struggle to lose weight again. So it is difficult for health to be a food writer. Many food writers generally die fairly young. Either they commit suicide or they overeat.
So your advice obviously is that if you want to be a food and travel writer, do it while you're young or younger.
And then quit at a suitable age when you still have your health.
But this is correct what he says, that food writing is not an easy task, because not like him, of course, but once I was commissioned by, I think, Condé Nast Traveler to go and do a food trail through, a meat trail through Madurai. I said, Madurai? I did not know too much about Madurai. But once I went there and stayed there for 3 days, and it took me about a week to recover. The food was fantastic. It was the best food I've eaten anywhere. Right outside the grand old temple, there are people, burning off hooves for paya and all kinds of things. We had fabulous meals of dosa with spleen and small intestines and whatnot. And one of the most memorable meals I had was in a small little restaurant, very well-known restaurant, where you had to, you served up these like set dosas, these fat dosas with kidney in the morning, a kidney curry. And that was it. There was no sambar, there was no chutney, nothing, just these two. And then the guide told me, he said, sir, we have to book the kidneys. I said, why do we have to book the kidneys? He said, I don't know, they say book kidneys. So we went there, we had booked 2 plates, so we got 4 kidneys. So then I asked him, my Tamil is not good at all. So I said, so why booking? So he looked at me and said, sir, 1 goat, 2 kidneys. So I said, oh, okay, that explained it.
So you had to eat those 2 goats after the kidneys.
So I don't know what happened to the goats. The goats, I think I ate for lunch and for dinner then after that in various forms, yeah.
Right.
But I have not seen a city that was so given to food as I saw Madurai. And of course, there was great vegetarian food, but I was completely taken aback by the quality of the non-vegetarian food and the conversations around it, which is what I wanted to come to. Whenever I was talking to these roadside restaurant owners, etc., either directly or through translators, the thing that I found that they kept referring to over and over again was where the goat came from. Was it was the goat feeding on that side of the Palani hills, or was it this side? What grass was it eating? And are these Rajasthan goats? So those you ate at that place, those are all Rajasthan goats, so that taste is different. Then what water they drank? Whether it's what's the river that flows to Madurai? Does anyone remember?
Vagai or
Vaigai, yeah. So he said, I said, but now there's no water in the Vaigai. He said, yes, but still, that the best goats have to drink the river water, etc. And long conversations like this.
I should go there if those goats are still left.
You should go, definitely,
I should
to
eat
Madurai,
your leftovers. Yeah.
But you were mentioning earlier that in South India, in general, they seem to take food more seriously, and food is more nuanced than perhaps it is, at least in North India.
I mean, I wouldn't know exactly. I mean, North Indian food also is very complex and has a lot of, there are a lot of great things about North Indian food. But in South India, there is a certain, this is just my impression that there is such a certain deep local tradition around things. Like speaking of mutton, for example, there's that Bannur mutton, which is legendary. So I spend a lot of time in Coorg, and there are some stalls that sell Bannur mutton. Bannur is a village outside Mysore, which is supposed to have the best goats in the world. And so they have this Bannur mutton sign. So sometimes when I buy mutton, not too often because I try to eat vegetarian at home and non-veg when I travel and eat. But sometimes when I buy mutton, so I asked, is it really Bannur mutton? They said, well, it's like Bannur mutton. So they even have that differentiation of like the semi-Bannur and the full Bannur. So the full Bannur you'll get like when the closer you go to Mysore. And the semi-Bannur you get like if you move beyond 100 kilometers of Mysore. So even that kind of thing people think about, which is in other places you might say that like a mutton is mutton, or a goat is a goat. But so some sort of subtlety like that exists, and which I find very charming and interesting when I talk about food with friends here in South India. We can have very long discussions. Yeah. And even with like men, like with you, like usually in other parts of India, if you have a discussion on food, it will have to be with a woman who is the one who knows the food. Whereas like I have friends in Delhi who like when I try to discuss food with them, they say that, oh, my IQ just went down to 72. You know, whereas with you, I can talk about food for hours.
That's because I have no choice. Nobody cooks at my house, in my house, except me.
Yeah, that's the difference, no? Like there, it would be the wife who cooks. So the man just eats.
That's
and
correct.
Has no clue what he eats.
That is correct. There are a lot of things I want to talk but how long do we have? When are we supposed to open it up for? We should open it up? Okay. So last regular question, of all the things that I've eaten, and I saw a heck of a lot of things, the oil-fried scorpions, smørbrød, is smørbrød correct pronunciation? Smørbrød in Denmark, grills pig's brain in Koshis. All of you go to Koshis, did you know that this is off the menu, but you can get grilled pig's brain? I didn't know, I don't go much to
In Koshis, even once I got testicles. Oh. I mean, not the owner's testicles, just like...
Sweet bread.
Yeah, some goats' testicles.
Okay. Of all these that you've eaten, what are the three things that you would pick which are most favorite foods across the world?
Across the world?
Yes, across the world.
This is a really difficult question. This is like a trick question, I think.
Yeah. I'm seeing if you're going to say pickled herring.
No, I mean, I would, like among some of the most fabulous foods, in China, I fell in love with something called chow tofu, which is like a rotten tofu, which they sort of deep fry in pig lard. This is like probably the unhealthiest thing in the world, but it's so delicious. So that was kind of I mean, and it's sort of, when you actually eat it, it's better than any ripe European cheese. And because Europeans nowadays very snooty about their ripe cheeses. And then you go to China, and as a street food for, just like 10 rupees or something like that, you get a small plate of this chow tofu. And then when I told Chinese friends about this, like, I mean, they were asking me, like, how are you enjoying China? And I said, oh, the chow tofu is fantastic. And they were like, you eat that, So even for them, it was kind of scary food. But, like, I really enjoyed that. Then...
what's the best thing you've eaten in India?
In India...
Don't say tandoori chicken.
No, I mean, there's so many wonderful things to eat here. And of course, that Palipalayam in Tirupur definitely is like one of the things like, I mean, there's nothing much to do as a tourist in Tirupur, but I wouldn't mind going back to Kongunadu again to have some Palipalayam. But ultimately, like, I think like when it comes at the end of the day, probably the best thing you can eat anywhere in the world is dal roti.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, like just like a hot roti and then some, thick dal like that. And like if you've been walking through mountains for hours and you're kind of hungry and you just want some, great comfort food. Dal roti is like, and it's one of those dishes like if you're not sure if a restaurant is good or not, if you order it, like it's very hard for them to fail. I mean, I would like to find a restaurant that cannot do good dal roti. I mean, provided they serve it.
I think that shows how much he's been Indianized, because dal roti, to my mind, is the most overrated food in India. I can't stand dal. Anyway, so we're open for questions. Please try to ask a question. Please keep it short so that we can accommodate as many as possible.
I mean, you don't have to keep it super short. Like you can use more than 3 words. Or as many words as you like, as long as it's less than 100. You can use the microphone so people hear.
I noticed, you've covered a lot of states and various varied food in India, but I think I missed reading something about Kurgi food and probably a bit of some Maharashtrian food as well, Mangalorean food. Being a Mangalorean, I was looking forward to reading something about Mangalorean food. But was there any reason why you didn't cover that, but you'd rather even went outside India and you've covered Sri Lankan and Bhutanese food?
Well, there's a technical thing. I mean, in a way, the book could have been much longer. But when I was working on it, my publishers told me you have to cut down 20% because it has to be like comfortable weight to keep in your hand while you read. So then I had to cut out like many of the things that and even when I was writing, finally editing the book, I was in Himachal Pradesh in the Kulu Valley and I was eating that food there, which is like absolutely fantastic. And I felt like, I should add a chapter on this. But then I realized that my publishers will probably fire me if I start adding instead of cutting down. So there were many things so I had actually a chapter on Kurg food, which I had to remove because cutting down 20% is like a huge amount. And Mangalorean food, of course, is lovely. I often go to Mangalore just to enjoy certain restaurants there that are like Mangala Bar, which you probably are familiar with. Most amazing food in the world. And so there were like a lot of food I had to kind of not put in it, because it's not like an encyclopedia, but it's a kind of also it is an attempt at a narrative in the book where it sort of starts in Bangalore and goes through South India and then towards the north, and which is like a sort of depicting a kind of food journey through India. And ultimately, you can't include everything unless you want to write like a 1,000-page book, which will be impossible to even sell. So there was a lot of things I had to leave out, and I had to kind of focus on the storytelling at some point. So, but there will probably be a second volume at some point. Provided that I don't die from too much cholesterol before that.
Readers' requests you can send in for what he might like to cover. For example, I took issue with the fact that what, to my mind, is the best food in India was not there at all, of course, now, which is Naga food, according to me. It's much, much better than Mangalorean food, trust me. There's no question about it.
Naga food is mentioned in passing also.
Passing, yeah.
No,
but it really is extremely good and very healthy as well.
And speaking of Mangalore food, I really like, first time I came across it was in Bombay. And I had gone to some restaurant and I just wanted something nice and familiar. So they had pomfret on the menu. And this was like a long time ago when I was very new to India. So I was thinking, Pommes frites, it's like in Sweden we call French fries pommes frites. It's a French word for finger chips. So I was thinking, oh, lovely, they have French fries. So I ordered pommes frites. And I got this fish dish, and I was just like shocked when it came to the table, this huge fish and all this curry and whatever it was. But then when I actually ate it, I really loved it. And since then I become a fan of Mangalorean food. So like in food writing also, there's that thing like when you misinterpret the menu, sometimes it can lead to very happy discoveries, because otherwise, if I hadn't made the mistake of ordering that, I would not have fallen in love with Mangalorean food. So then I took the train from Bombay to Mangalore immediately and found some really lovely restaurants and ended up spending weeks there. So definitely, I mean, it's worth writing about. It just didn't fit into the plot of this book. Any other comments or questions?
Okay. So, Jack, I haven't read the book, so just a question about food. So, people say that food brings people together and it kind of creates camaraderie and so on and so forth. Now, you have traveled all around, world and about food. And today's world, if you see divisive and about divided across left, right, and caste and religion and so on and so forth. So, do you see some kind of a hope that food brings us together?
Oh, you mean that food should create world peace?
Yeah. Something like that.
I think
Yeah,
within India, it would be enough.
I mean, that's a very good question. Yeah, in India, there's some tricky issues about, because of these food taboos and all that kind of thing that are going on. But I think in a global sense, food actually has been one of those things that brings the world closer. Because, for example, like when I was growing up in Sweden, which is like, for those of you who don't know Sweden, it's like a small remote corner of the Arctic Circle where nothing fun ever happens. But at some point, suddenly in the 1970s, there would be the occasional Chinese restaurant, and you could go into a restaurant and be in China. Of course, they made Chinese food to suit Swedish taste, but we didn't know that until we went to China. And then after some time, you would have other restaurants like now there's an Indian restaurant almost virtually in every street corner in Sweden. And so more than like Indian embassies in the West, the Indian restaurants are spreading Indian culture in remote countries like Sweden. And of course, their idea of Indian food becomes a bit like lopsided on some level, because it's their idea is, of course, that it's like tandoori chicken and palak paneer and all that, and they don't understand that Indian food is really masala dosa and vada sambar and South Indian food. So, but it's still like opening these channels for understanding foreign cultures. And even like when I first came to India 30 years ago, we didn't really have that much outside food, but it was very Indian food, and pizzas were some kind of, dry rounds of bread with ketchup and maybe a little bit of Amul cheese. But like now, Punjab is one of the biggest producers of, Punjabis are very much into mozzarella. So the Punjabi mozzarella is very famous, and you have the Auroville cheeses from Pondicherry, and so so you have Kempe Gouda cheese. Huh?
Kempe Gouda, Gouda, yeah.
Huh? It's a cheese. Kempe Gouda. Amazing. Look at that, like how food can actually combine, Karnataka and some. Gouda is what, from Belgium or Holland or one of those countries? Goudas are, of course, Indians also, but like the cheese I am talking about, not the caste. So that way, how food can actually create links between people who otherwise would not actually understand each other culturally. You can start by trying the other people's foods and enjoy that. And suddenly you start to understand their culture. Like, I think for me especially, one of the my biggest illuminations in India has been to see how diverse food is. So, like, I no longer think of Indian food as Indian food, but I think of it as the foods of India, and which is more to the point. That, and that also, like, how the different regions will have different foods depending on the geographical circumstances, the cultural differences. So that way, I think, like, food can actually be a very good way to understand a different country. I mean, it's easier than reading a thick book to have a good meal.
Hi, Zach. This is Marina from South First. I just had a couple of questions since the title of your book is Digesting India, and I'm assuming you have several stories of gastronomical mishaps. So what would you say is the major difference in that sense when we compare North Indian cuisine and South Indian cuisine, because there is a stark difference in terms of spices and styles of cooking. So now we've talked about taste, but now we talk about digesting it, actually going down the gullet. What would you say are some primary differences between North Indian cuisine and generally South Indian cuisine?
Okay, if one were to generalize, I think one point is that if you go to a restaurant like Kareem's in Delhi and you order anything, it will be swimming in oil. I mean, you'll have a layer of oil, and through that oil you will see a huge piece of cholesterol swimming in massive amount of spices. And it's really tasty. Like, you have to kind of use your hands to remove enough of the oil so you can actually get to the food. So North Indian food, if I was living there, I would probably had a heart attack long ago. But like in South India, there's much more of that idea of, lightly frying some vegetables and with a little bit of spice, and you can actually, that is a dish. It doesn't have to swim in oil. So, and if you go for these traditional meals on banana leaves, most of it's very healthy and wholesome, so it feels lighter and all. I don't mean to dismiss North Indian food, because they probably also have one or two healthy things that you can eat without necessarily risking your life. But in South India, in general, the food is much more geared towards you can always eat the same thing and without getting too much of overdose on it. So, so it has this. I mean, that is my impression, at least, that there's a healthy, nutritious tradition in the South Indian, especially in the vegetarian cooking, which is so common that you don't have to worry too much about overeating or getting indigestion. Like, otherwise, I mean, much of my travel has been about digesting and hygiene pills.
What would you say is a very general or several misconceptions that people in India especially have about South Indian food? This could be people from South India themselves, North India, across the country, but common misconceptions that they have about South Indian food, if you can say there is any.
I mean, these are really questions you should ask of an Indian expert.
For example, a lot of people, like if you say a healthy Indian breakfast, the first thing they will say is idli, dosa, and they will list a lot of, heavy ranges of food, but it's all rice-based. Again, technically doesn't really come under the healthy category, but a lot of North Indians, since I'm from there, have this conception that I'll eat one dosa smothered with ghee with a lot of potatoes stuffed in, and I'm eating a healthy breakfast, whereas a besan ka chila, this pure protein, significantly is quite healthier in comparison. So now that's a misconception again. So what do you think is like an idea or a notion people have about South Indian food, which is generally not really that true, since you have...
Well, one of the things is that I think also what Samar was pointing out earlier is that people think that, oh, South India is only vegetarian food. But actually, there's a lot of non-veg going on here as well, though maybe it's not swimming in that much oil as in North India. So like when North Indians hesitate to have a holiday in South India, they might think, oh, we won't get any non-veg. But really, like in many parts of Tamil Nadu, you get all kinds of meats and generally there's a lot of non-veg going on. And apparently Tamil Nadu is one of the biggest non-veg biryani consuming states in the world. I read somewhere. Like they eat more biryani than North Indians even. So, I mean, I don't know if that statistic is correct, but it was somewhere in the news. And news, one should always be aware that it might be fake news. But anyway, the idea that the South is purely purely veg is quite common, and whereas actually South Indian non-veg can be really good, and especially if you go to Mangalore and have the seafood, and Kerala also, of course, seafood. You have so much interesting seafood cuisine, which you don't really get in North India because it's so much inland, so you won't get that fresh catch that you get along the South Indian coast. And that is one thing that people tend to forget. Then the other thing is that South Indian food, from a health point of view, I've realized also because they're so rice-based, like you mentioned, and we even have like things like akki roti. So we make like rotis from rice here. So it's also a very good country to, good place to come to if you're a gluten intolerant. Like you'll have no problems. You can eat without, that's becoming an increasingly a problem among, gluten intolerance, I don't know if it's a fad or a real thing, but like I come across a lot of Europeans who come to South India and they find akki roti, and then it's like, oh, wonderful. I can actually eat bread without gluten. So that is one thing that is often forgotten, that how South Indian cuisine is very suitable to people who want to eat gluten-free, and like even vegans will eat nicely here.
But that's not a misconception, that's what you're saying, that's a fact. Like South Indian food is generally not gluten heavy, so you can come and enjoy gluten-free food in South India, is that right?
But like people don't think about that, like when they think of Indian food, oh, there'll be all these rotis and gluten and all that. When they come to South India, they'll realize that, oh, you can actually have a bread without gluten.
We are out of time, so we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Zac.
Thank you, Samar. And thank you all for listening so patiently.